Welcome to Impostor Hour with Liz and Greg. We're here to explore the imposter syndrome that haunts creatives, delving into how it affects their lives and work. Join us as we chat with authors and artists about creativity, self-doubt, featuring imposter characters in their stories, and the occasional imposter who pops up in their day-to-day lives.
Today, we are so excited to have Ashley Winstead on the show. Ashley is the national bestselling author of Midnight is the Darkest Hour, The Last Housewife, In My Dreams I Hold a Knife, The Boyfriend Candidate, and Fool Me Once. Her books have been Library Reads picks, Lone Star picks, Best of Amazon picks, and Best of Apple Book picks, and have received starred reviews from Publishers Weekly, Kirkus Reviews, Book Page, and Library Journal. Her work has been covered in the New York Times, Washington Post, Crime Reads, Parade, Cosmo, Good Morning America, Good Housekeeping, Seattle Times, and the Southern Review of Fiction, among other outlets. Her books have been translated into over a dozen languages worldwide and optioned for television. Ashley holds a PhD in contemporary American literature and lives in Houston. I can take a breath. Welcome, Ashley. And
Hi.
I think we don't have your upcoming book in that roundup when I pulled your bio. So welcome. This book, Will Bury Me, will have just come out when this episode airs, and we are so excited to have you. And we can't wait to talk to you about this book and everything. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Liz and Greg. I just have to say, nothing makes me sweat harder than hearing my own bio, like being read and then being like, oh my God, I need to make so many edits and like get it down to one sentence. But I have to say at the start, I love this podcast so much. I love listening, like being a listener. So I'm so geeked out that I get to thank you for having me. It's so fun to actually be here.
Oh. Well, thank you. And we're all geeking. This is the geek out episode for sure.
The whole reason we came together with this podcast was just to like geek out with our fellow geeks and
yes,
talk shop and get into stuff. So perfect.
There's nothing better.
Yeah, agreed.
Well, I don't know if Greg knows this, but after I finished this book, Will Bury Me, I wrote Ashley an email, and it was like one of those experiences where, and I should do this more. I've been thinking about this, when I read a book that like really rocks me or affects me, I need to let the author know, even if I don't know them personally, because I know as an author how that feels to hear that or read that, but also just, when it's fresh, to get down on the page like how the book has resonated, and it's a little self-serving because I wanted to kind of like synthesize everything about the book in one place. But really, I mean, this is my favorite of your books.
Thank you. It's mine too.
Share in the foreword that it's pretty personal, deeply personal, and I was wondering if you wouldn't mind kind of starting there. Because I think writing through grief and big life events is something that Greg and I talk about a lot and really relate to.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I, confess to you that email just had me like, it rocked me and it meant so much to me. So thank you for that. And yeah, this book, I will, this book is very, very personal. It's about it's very, very personal in its subject matter and also in form, because I joke around that this is like my autofiction thriller. And because I like in a lot of ways, I kind of used Jane, who's our main character. I gave her a lot of experiences that happened to me very directly from, without changing any much. And so that was the first time I had ever done anything close to that, and was kind of wondering how it was going to go. But yeah, so this book kind of first came to me when I was sitting at a dinner with librarians post Hoover Public Library's Southern Voices Festival, which is a weekend that they put on. It was wonderful. We were at the Bonefish Grill afterwards, all the authors and the librarians. It was so fun having this dinner. And a librarian across from me was talking about the fact that she had started a mystery and like true crime book club at the library for library patrons, and it was having like skyrocketing success. Like people were clamoring to get in, and we started talking about how popular true crime was, and kind of speculating around the table about all the reasons why. And of course, you got everything from like, oh, people are so interested in, seeing justice being served, even for strangers. Or, there's this voyeuristic kind of exploitative aspect to it. So all these ideas were kind of being tossed around the table. And I was sitting there very quietly because kind of just like ruminating on the fact that I hadn't been a true crime obsessive until literally just a few months prior to this dinner, when I had fallen so deep down the rabbit hole of the Idaho murders, which, happened in November 2022. And this was the early months of 2023, like February 2023. And I had just become so engrossed in this, staying up and spending all of these hours watching videos on YouTube, and people were 3D modeling, the different things that could have happened with the crime, people trying to put the pieces together. And so I'm sitting there at that dinner, and it finally clicked for me that maybe the reason why I was so obsessed with this case for the first time, like true crime, because my father had passed away just a few months before that news broke. And he passed away very young, in his 50s, and very unexpectedly. And it was a huge, massive shock, on top of all of the grief. And there was a part of my mind that just went right into detective mode. Well, how could this have happened? Oh, he died of a heart attack. Oh, it turns out that he knew he had high blood pressure, and doctors had recommended that he take medicine for it, but he chose not to. And what if this had happened? And it just like all the questions, really, and where is he now? And all the questions that people have when they lose someone. And I realized in that moment at that dinner that I had been transferring all of that, like grief and shock, into this attention to this community and this other crime. It was like the way of channeling that. And so I had this kind of like theory that in my head, that there was just something very deeply human about the need to know no matter the cost, and the way that kind of being a detective or seeking answers is an expression of love and attention, but also a really fundamental discomfort with the fact that we're all human beings with an expiration date, and that trying to figure it out for other people is a way of trying to make peace with it ourselves. So sorry for rambling so much at the outset, but all of that, it's rare to get like a click moment like that. But that's what happened to me at that dinner. And I knew that I wanted to write about it and explore it, in a way where there was a lot of fidelity to my own experience. So then that's where the idea for this book kind of came.
Mm. Well, I thank you for sharing that firstly, and so very sorry for your loss. As Liz and I have talked about before, pretty candidly, part of kind of what finally got us writing together for our first novel was Liz had gotten out of a relationship that had gone, pretty spectacularly wrong, and at the shortly before that, I had lost my father as well, and so that was thank you, but that was part of the kind of what kind of galvanized us finally writing, was that sort of that personal loss and that grieving process, and then channeling that into something positive. So I'm glad also that you have a creative outlet, because I think a creative outlet can be so wonderful for that, can be so healing as you go. I wanted to actually ask you specifically about something related. The epigraph for this book is by the wonderful poet Richard Sicken
Yeah.
from his collection Crush, and I thought it was interesting. Firstly, because the excerpt of the poem obviously relates quite a bit to the book itself, but also my understanding is that he wrote that after the death of his boyfriend, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes, when he was back in, I want to say 2005 is when Crush was published. And the entire book, this is my favorite book, period.
Mm,
And my favorite collection of poetry. He's my favorite writer. Um,
yeah,
so I'm very biased when I say that he's a genius. But this, yeah, the entire collection of poetry is about grief and wrestling with um, trying to step outside your life and see it as a writer, as a narrative, just as a movie. Even he just tries out all these different modes. And so yes, the that quote that I used is about a kind of sly, cheeky way of talking about, there are many names in history, but none of them are ours. Um, and so that just spoke to me because that is so much what the book is about.
right. Right. I just thought it was, so I'm sorry to interrupt. I just, to add, I always think it's interesting when you have something like that where there's this sort of creative conversation, let's say, where,
Yeah.
two pieces of work are in conversation. And obviously it occurred to me as I was thinking about that it was a marriage, not only of the content, but also of the kind of the emotional state that, you were probably both of you in when you were putting the work together
Yeah.
itself.
You
Yeah.
know, you know what is so beautiful and striking about what you just said is that it mirrors what Richard himself wrote to me when
Really.
I reached out to him for his permission. Um,
Mm.
because I I know you don't always have to do this to kind of just excerpt from folks' work if it's certain lines or less, but I wanted to reach out because I'm using his lines from his poetry in like a bunch of my upcoming books. So I was like, I should probably. He's gonna be like, what is this weirdo doing out there in the world? Ashley Winstead, why is she so obsessed with me? So I was like, maybe I should shoot an email into the ether and
Yeah.
ask if it's okay. And he actually wrote me back, and I'm gonna fangirl so hard, but he wrote me back, and he was like, hey, this is absolutely lovely, because of course I fangirl gushed about what he's my husband and I had a reading from one of his poems at our wedding, just like he's everything to me. And he wrote back, epigraphs are put writers in conversation with one another. And
Mm.
he's like, and it's very beautiful to now be in conversation with you. So let's keep this
Oh,
going.
wow.
And I was like, oh my God.
Chills.
Yeah. And so, yeah, exactly. And of course, like, trust both Greg and this poet to put it so beautifully.
Mhm.
But you're right. It is about this conversation that we're contributing to. That's what we do when we write books, right? We're trying to say something and contribute to this conversation that we see happening around us. Um, and that is what Jane, my main character, is trying to do in this kind of like conceit that I
Mhm.
constructed for the book, which is telling the book as if Jane is writing her memoir, her like
Mhm.
confessional tell-all. And so it's really important to her to have her say and to inject her voice and account of the truth into the conversation, into history, really,
Mhm.
to try to
Yeah.
shape it, because she feels that history and the current conversation is doing her dirty, so she's got to
Mhm.
correct the record. So yeah, it's all about that history as a kind of living conversation that you can be shut out of, or try to insert yourself into.
Mhm.
Mm.
Well, I'm curious that you talked about how kind of engrossed and almost involved you got in the Idaho case, and I strongly relate to that.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, what was it that kind of drew you to weave it into a fictional story as opposed to, because you have a journalistic background, for
Yeah.
example, and I guess it's a 2 or 3 part question. When you kind of made that decision, you're interweaving it with what you call autofiction, which is
Mhm.
amazing, but also very vulnerable. So, how did you feel in terms of like the responsibility to yourself about, maybe protecting yourself in that vulnerability, and then also to the actual facts of the case? Because there's victims and a
Yeah.
lot of other people who've made that case almost their own, and
Yep.
you speak to that in the book. So that's like 40 questions and not
No,
really
I love
any.
every one of them. Beautiful and amazing. And I'll start with the easy one, which is just about myself. And knowing 100% that this was going to be the most vulnerable thing possible. And in fact, I had to like warn each of my family members before they picked up the book that they were just going to see not only me and what happened on the page, but in some slivers themselves, because I kind of like drew on an amalgamation of our experiences. And so that was vulnerable. And knowing that the easy answer is like, I know this is gonna hit me hard and is a vulnerable thing. I have no protection for it. I'm just going out there without like a Kevlar vest on, and this is just a choice I made, um and that's okay. I feel maybe just the thick skin of this being my sixth book
Right.
will be enough, but um and I think just the protection of knowing that this, at the end of the day, this is a book between me and my father, and that's all it needs to be. And that's it was enormously cathartic to write. It helped me grieve in a way that has put me in a different place than the rest of my family members, because we're so lucky writers, just like you said earlier, Greg. I think like having this creative outlet to process is so enormously beneficial, um, that it really, really honestly helped me. So that, to me, that's enough. Um, in terms of the case and thinking about using writing fictional accounts of both the Idaho case and another case that I then got also very obsessed with, the Abraham Shakespeare case, and thinking, which also, not to spoil anything in the book, but another case that the slews are engaged in closely mirrors as a fictionalized version of that case. And then also thinking about the response to Gabby Petito. So I knew going in that this book isn't about any of those cases. This is not a book, trying to fictionalize the Idaho murders or the Abraham Shakespeare case. This is a book about a community that springs up around sensationalized, attention grabbing murders and crimes. And so having that focus, like, it's always about our, and I include myself in this, like the true crime community's response and what it looks like to be on the outside forming parasocial relationships with crime victims and victims' families, as opposed to, Taylor Swift or, insert whomever else. Um, and like the ethics of that. But also I hope people are seeing like the beauty of that too, because I think at the end of the day, while it can make one feel queasy to think about becoming really obsessed with a murder case and the facts of someone's death and trying to piece that together, I also think that there's incredible beauty in having so much empathy, or in relating so deeply to strangers that they occupy your every thought or so much of your thoughts, and you're willing to go to really great lengths to tell their story, to talk about them. That's an act of love at the same time that it's kind of that's an act of exploitation. And I don't think you have to choose one thing or the other. I think it can be both at the same time. um, But all that being said, the cases that I chose to fictionalize, Abraham Shakespeare, a little bit Gabby Petito, but then really centrally the University of Idaho cases, and especially Idaho, were to me high watermarks in the true crime, the timeline of true crime, especially the University of Idaho case, because what you saw with that case is an almost unprecedented boots on the ground effort by amateur sleuths, and a lot of like journalists have been doing this for a while, flying into the place where a crime has occurred and camping out and like trying to get interviews with folks as they're walking by and totally ambushed and unprepared for it. But there has been so much journalism and really smart think pieces about the fact that we all were so obsessed with this case. There was so much attention and time devoted, it still is to this day, so much ink spilled, so many folks who invaded this small town of Moscow, Idaho, went in person to the places where the victims were known to have gone before they died, like a particular bar, tried to do in-person interviewing. Like there was so much main character insertion on behalf of true crime, of sleuths, amateur detectives, that to me, there was something really unique about this case, and I wanted to talk about that specifically. And it felt like the best way to do that was to almost beat by beat, at least in the kind of first early part of this book, have a case unfold like this case did, where there seemed to be a complete lack of police knowledge and activity that then made sleuths want to fill in the gaps, that had the families of victims going on national television asking for amateur sleuths to help them, that to tell this story, that there was just this the psychics on TikTok saying that they just knew that a particular person was the killer, and then that person being doxxed and having death threats and terrible things happening. Like there's so much that occurred in this case that I thought needed to be written about and talked about. And so I wanted to do that, kind of true to, I needed to process what I was seeing basically and participating in. So that felt like that was the choice to make.
Yeah. Well, you're talking about kind of the investigative aspect of the
Yeah.
story, and one of the things that I think that you delve into and really examine and kind of sort of indict in a way is a lot of the things, a lot of the sort of things that happen around those things. Who controls the narrative? You get into like I think what you refer to as pretty bias, right?
Yep.
Who gets the coverage, like what demographics are going to get different treatments depending on that, both from the press and also from investigative, from the police, from detectives, agencies, things like that. Is that something, sort of you went in at the outset kind of having those ideas, or did those develop as you kind of dug deeper in?
Yeah, no, and this is when I get to like indict myself too, so that's always fun. But this is something that really you might know really was a conversation that sprung out of the Gabby Petito case. Not that it wasn't there before, but the fact that Gabby Petito's disappearance just galvanized, and this predated the University of Idaho case, that just galvanized so much attention and had everyone chipping in. And a lot of people rightfully raised the point that there were so many missing men and women of color, so many, missing men and women who, and especially women who didn't come from, middle class backgrounds, or weren't like a beautiful young blonde white girl. And pointing to the differences in attention and output and effort. And I remember hearing that and being like, yes, this is so obviously clear. And then what did I do but turn around and become obsessed with this case in which four young, attractive, middle class, if not more, white college students were killed tragically. And of course, like, there's nothing, this is not to discount the utter tragedy of their deaths. Like, that, it doesn't discount that, to point out that there was so much outsized attention. But I do think that is part of, because part of the book is trying to ascertain, like, why this case, why the emotional attachment on behalf of me / Jane. I'm doing what you should never do and conflate yourself and a main character, but I confess to autofiction. So, why this emotional hook, and why this, like, international attention on this particular case. And it has to do, I think the answers are numerous, with the utter arbitrariness of their death that came out of nowhere, the shock of it, the fact that there were unfortunately so many young students who lost their life at once. And I think a lot of it had to do that these were young, attractive, vibrant college students with big social media presences, and the lessons that I thought I was paying attention to with the Gabby Petito case, I kind of like push right past that. And so this book is trying to, through Jane's perspective, have that conversation in a thoughtful way, but also a way that condemns, Jane is like condemning herself. And I hope that comes across as well.
Yes, no, I was just going to say that. I think there is so much self-accountability, and I think the introspection of Jane, and also the actual conversations of the characters who are in this community that's created as a result of this crime, these online sleuths. You do it very skillfully in a way that it never feels like anyone's on a soapbox. It's not strident. It's just, all of the different angles that you touched on and more. And, I'm curious, I think it's really interesting because if looking back at your previous books, there's a common theme about, murders on college campuses, or suicides that could be murders, or there's a lot about college life and dorm life and dark academia in certain respects. So this was right in your wheelhouse, Ashley. Like, if it hadn't happened in real life and you had written a case like this, it made sense for you. You would be the writer right now who I would want to unpack the different layers of this. But I think I mean, I mean it. And I think what's so interesting about what you're talking about, like these kind of overexposure cases of, beautiful young white women, there is this degree which you touch on in your book, in this particular book, that I'd love to talk about a little bit more, which is the social media aspect, like the availability and access to the lives of the victims through what they've shared. And, that to me is what kind of created this firestorm with this case in particular too, because these victims unfortunately were available. They had a lot of open profiles and a lot of people around them who were willing to talk about their lives. And then also the kind of admission of the police not knowing much. So it was like saying to the entire online sleuth community, like, have at it.
Yes. Like, please help. Here's all the ingredients at your fingertips. Here's an invitation. Let's do this. No, you're so right. That it's very unique in that way, in a way we haven't seen, but in a way that I truly, if I'm allowed to make predictions, predict that other cases are going to go down that route in the future.
Yes.
I really do. I think we're just going to see more and more of this, of like the Idaho response, both from the true crime community, but from police, from victims' families, just the sort of like, oh, let's put all of these resources together. That's the kind of the hive mind. That's the kind of like generous way of phrasing, I guess, what the armchair detective community and can do. But no, absolutely true. And the only reason I was laughing, I just have to say, about the college, my through line of college, is my agent is like, Ashley, you gotta like go somewhere else. Like, enough.
You got to
Um,
graduate.
yeah, you gotta graduate. Absolutely. And I feel like across all these books, I've managed to find like a different way in
Mhm.
where I've like just usurped her reach or like her, and she's like, okay, fine, if we're doing it this way, but I think I will have to graduate with the future thrillers.
Well, Greg, before I know you're eager to ask a question, but just as a caveat to anyone listening who hasn't read Ashley's books or all of them, they're all very different. It's not like she's doing the same plot. I mean, it's like astounding how different and interesting they are from each other. So don't assume.
I appreciate that because yeah.
I will go ahead right now and back that up, and I will push back a little. I'm going to push back against your agent on that assertion.
Yeah.
In fact, this speaks to something I wanted to ask you about. I recently enjoyed your conversation with Polly Stewart for Crime Reads, where you were analyzing The Blind Assassin by Margaret Atwood.
Thank you.
One of my favorite authors, one of my favorite books also of hers. And it was interesting for so many reasons, but part of what it is I love how you kind of broke down having encountered it first as a young writer.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an incredibly, for listeners who have not listened to it, or have not read it rather, it's an incredibly ambitious novel on a lot of fronts, right? Yeah. And I love how you kind of talked about being a young writer and encountering it. And there was a certain amount of like almost, I guess, intimidation, but you also figured out how to kind of use it as motivation to build your skill set as a writer, to one day be able to write something like that. And I think that kind of to the point Liz was making, you do write across different genres, you write different, there are themes that sort of, again, are kind of in conversation with one another across your oeuvre, but you also are writing a lot of different genres and different kind of structural things like that. And you talk specifically about with The Blind Assassin, the idea of like braided narrative, the idea of sort of genre blending, which I think you've done as you've gone along. And you talk about being, feeling more emboldened about kind of being able to do that. So could you just talk about maybe the importance of that idea of sort of, raising the bar in your own work?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I'm just naive enough, to kind of, or well, maybe we'll call it optimistic or something, to kind of look at a writer like Atwood and what she's capable of doing and say like, well, maybe I can like slowly chip away at, one day not getting there because I'm not that naive, but or just like using that as fuel, because you're right that when I was, 2021 and reading The Blind Assassin for the first time, and I knew enough to appreciate how damn good she was, and the feat of writing that it took to pull off a book that weaves not only in and out of timelines and perspectives, but writes a science fiction book within a family drama within a mystery arc. And I remember just being so blown away by what she was able to achieve with that book, that I thought to myself like, man, this is it. Like, this is what I want to do. And later in my career, after facing so much rejection, nonstop rejection, to the point where I hadn't written for 10 years because I got rejected from MFA programs, and I was like, well, this is the world telling me this is not for me. Woe is me, I'll go do other things. And then after 10 years, convincing myself to try again, I was so timid that I really that 21-year-old who had been so inspired by Margaret Atwood was like, okay, no, I can't try for that. I'm going to do little slivers, just this one little thing. So I'm going to try for a mystery to see if I can write a well-paced book and adhere to genre conventions and yada yada. And I think this that I've been on this journey since then to kind of allow myself to dream again and be ambitious again, because it's vulnerable being ambitious. I know that sounds, I don't know, okay, you guys know what I mean. It's vulnerable saying like, I want to write something like The Blind Assassin, or I want to I want to like spin across genres, or attempt to do braided narratives, or all of these things, because implicit in that is like this thing like, oh, I think I can do it, like I think I have the chops to do it. And so again, it's vulnerable, kind of believing in yourself in the face of your Goodreads scores and online chatter and like everything in the writing world that's like, probably not. You probably can't do that. But yeah, I'm kind of like freeing myself lately. I'm on this journey of freeing myself to try to attempt all the things that I want to do. And this book will bury me especially felt like that, because I was freeing myself to, write this sort of like very close to home autofiction style thing, to kind of experiment with mixed media, to experiment with this form, to experiment once again with frustrating endings, just like everything that I knew was going to be a challenge for me later. I feel like maybe I've swerved from the original question, so I'm gonna stop myself now and just
No, I mean, this is why we love, this format. We can just kind of go where the conversation takes us. And, to hear you talk about being rejected a lot and then not writing for a decade is like, holy shit. To hear that you got rejections, it makes me feel better, because when you talk to authors and writers and artists and creative people who are so good at what they do, and like you're writing multiple genres, which is, let's talk about that in a minute. But to hear you say like you were so discouraged you stopped writing, but then you came back to it, like tell us that story. Because if imposter syndrome stems from anything, I have to think that, I don't want to lead you, but that probably contributes to any possible feelings of imposter syndrome you have. So can you tell us that, and how you made it back and how you freed yourself? It's so inspiring.
no, I really appreciate that. And I was just about to make a joke like, I'm on the perfect podcast because I'm nothing but imposter syndrome. I'm like, like an imposter in a trench coat or whatever. So yeah, my entire life I wanted to be a writer. I feel like a lot of us come or have similar stories. It's like once you discover reading and the things that you can do with language, you're hooked and you just want that to be the focus of your life. And so I was very traditionally pursuing that. I went and majored in English and creative writing in undergrad. I was studying with all these like really accomplished short story writers and novelists and poets. I did think that I was going to be a poet for a little while, but that was short lived. But yeah, I did all of this, and then my senior year of college, I applied to 12 MFA programs. Which I thought was a really big, juicy number, and there was no way anything could go wrong with that. And that spring of my senior year was an experience of just getting those thin little envelopes in the mail, one after the other, even from my own undergrad alma mater. So betrayed. And I don't think, I've had my heart broken romantically. I've had my heart broken in a lot of ways, but I don't think I've had my heart broken in a way that like changed fundamentally my identity the way that those rejections did, because I was just young enough to do that thing that you're never supposed to do as a writer, which is listen to the no and take it at face value and say like, okay, yep, all the best programs in the country like don't think that I'm it. So I went and I worked in the music industry, and then I went and worked in the television industry out in LA. And that all sounds cool, but none of it is even one iota glamorous. And then I was like, well, okay, school before the whole rejection thing was a good place for me, so I'll go get my PhD, because that's 6 years of being close to books, and maybe I don't get to write them, but I'll study them and I'll talk about them. And that'll be my that'll be how I soothe that kind of broken heart, is I'll find another way in. And so I did all of that. And it wasn't until I was in my last year, my 6th year of graduate school, and you're writing your dissertation, which is, and which is a 350-page academic, like, opus, essentially. It's a book length manuscript. And, so I was getting up every single day and grinding from coffee to wine, which is still my pattern. But I was doing this and finding that rhythm with writing. And after I defended my dissertation, I had this moment where I thought to myself, wildly, Ashley, you just wrote a book. And you wrote it about the driest subject you could possibly imagine, like great, intellectually interesting, but like, woof, no one is going to read this book, or whatever. And what if you just put that same work ethic you just trained yourself in? What if you directed that toward something you were actually like really excited to write? And then what if you just did it on the side, in place of watching Netflix with your husband every night, because you were never going to show anyone in the world, and it was just like a fun little project for yourself between you and your laptop. And I had to convince myself, I literally had a sticky note on my laptop that said, no one will see this. And I had to like look at it in order to like my shattered ego that I had stitched back together by this point, in order for that to like allow me to write again. And after a year, I had a book, a YA fantasy, a YA contemporary fantasy. Don't ask me why, but that was just like what I was feeling. I think maybe it was a reaction to having to like read 250 of like the great American novels. So I just wanted like the exact, not the opposite, because there's wonderful great American YA fantasies novels, but just like something that felt unabashedly fun to me. And so then at the end of that whatever it is, that like optimistic part of your brain, naive, or that masochistic part of your brain, which is like, maybe we try again, with this little thing, maybe we show it to someone. And so that is what kind of started it. Not that that was the end of the rejections, but that by any means, in fact, just starting whole new chapters of them. But that was how I kind of convinced myself to do it again. And I really wrestle with those 10 years that I spent not writing, because on the one hand, I'm like, well, I soaked up a lot of life experience. And then I became the kind of person who could try again. And maybe that's enough for what those 10 years were supposed to be. But there's that other part of my brain that's just like, what if I hadn't let those rejections rock me so hard that I could have spent those 10 years writing and getting better and, and all that. So we will never know, but I'm just glad I'm here now.
Yeah,
well, I'm going to take this too. Yeah, I mean, indeed. I was going to say, I'm going to take a swing and say you've made up for lost time.
Yeah.
Quite gracefully.
This is my answer to why people are like, are you a crazy person? Like, why are you writing so fast? And it's like, I'm doing it so fast before they tell me again that I can't do it anymore. And, just trying.
Sure. I mean, on some level, we're probably all doing some version of that, right?
Yes.
Like, really well can. It's interesting to hear that part of it where, you were doing academic writing. So, you get the kind of the research and the, as you said, the coffee to wine kind of
Yeah.
discipline of the actual writing and the mechanics and sitting down to it. But one of the things that blows me away about your writing is, you mentioned earlier the importance of both poetry and short fiction
Mhm.
as you were developing, and that really comes across in your prose styling.
Thank
Um,
you.
you know what I mean? I mean, it
That
just
is
like,
that is the loveliest thing ever. Just, that is so nice because I have just so much admiration for short story writers and poets.
yeah.
Thank
Well,
you.
that I think that kind of the brevity, the economy of language, the imagery, the actual flow, line flow and meter and all of those kind of things come across in your prose writing. What is I guess, yeah, let me just ask, what to you is, it's obvious that you put a lot of consideration and care into your writing on a line level.
Yeah.
What is that for you? I don't know, like if you could just talk a bit about that, I guess.
No, that is everything to me. And in fact, like sometimes I have to remind myself that there's supposed to be a plot and and other things like that, and like a book is supposed to be moving forward because I will often in the drafting process just get absolutely lost in about like 2 feet of water. I'll just be like really really because I think all of us writers are just like prose, I'll say prose enthusiasts instead of prose snobs, but just like really really attracted to what we can do with language and just like how exciting that is. And I remember the first time it occurred to me that I could maybe one day be a writer is when I was super super young, like 7 years old. And those like creative writing assignments you get from your elementary school teachers where they're like, write a paragraph about insert whatever. I was living in California at the time, so it was like the sound or the like a ship sailing on the ocean or whatever. Like let's see a paragraph on that. And you would have thought they had told me that I was like singularly responsible for putting a man on the moon because I took it so seriously. And I have this vivid memory of just like pacing my bedroom that I share with my little sister. So she was obviously locked out, but like thinking like, okay, the ship, da 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 da, and hearing and really falling in love with like the rhythm of the sentences and thinking like, oh my gosh, how cool that I can come up with a sentence that sounds like waves hitting like a hull or is doing more than just like conveying meaning. And I didn't even, obviously, later on, many years later in grad school, I would actually learn the difference between like a signifier and a signified and why that's, there's like different lives that words have both in meaning and like affect. But little me was just like so in love with just creating things with language like it was Play-Doh or something. And I think that has never left me. And I'm sure it's a thing that unites just so many of us writers. And so I am very guilty of going in a lot of different tangents with my drafting process because I'll just get so obsessed with finding the exact right way to say something. Um,
Mhm.
which I know we've talked about like writing a lot of books quickly, but I'm currently overdue on a number of books, and so this is if my editors are listening, it's because I'm trying to get the sentences just right, and I just can't move that fast. But yeah, that joy, and there's nothing better than reading a book and having a sentence say something in the exact way that unlocks like this moment of resonance or whatever it is where you're like, that's exactly what that is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I've never heard somebody describe it quite that way.
Mhm.
Alchemy, right? There's like
Yeah,
an alchemy to it, right? There's an alchemy of reading a line when you're
yeah,
like, I had this thought 100 times, and so has everyone else. But there's this way that this writer wrote it.
Mhm.
That's like it just like it like
nails it.
yeah, it opens it up, right?
Yep.
Mhm.
And it's way. Yeah. Wow.
What I'm really curious about is the way you're able to write multiple genres, because, each one, whether it's, a thriller mystery or a dark drama or a romance, it sounds like sci-fi fantasy is also, in your toolkit. Like, how how are you approaching when you're sitting down and you have an idea? How is it like, okay, these characters are either going to fall in love or they're going to murder each other? Or like,
Yeah.
what does it depend on are you a mood writer? Do you feel like you need to like alternate? What's happening there?
So I got myself in this. I will not call it a mess by any means, but in this conundrum of having multiple books due every year, because I am a mood writer, or at least I used to be. I used to have that luxury. And I was, kind of sitting around during the first wave of the COVID pandemic back in 2020 with more time on my hands and wanting very much to live a narrative where things worked out well in the end, and everything was skewed towards happiness and comedy. And so to kind of like self-soothe, really, and entertain myself, I wrote a romance novel. And it was the year while I had already gotten my first book deal for In My Dreams I Hold a Knife, and I'd finished my edits on those. And so it was just like that big wait period, that like awful period where before things start happening and you're like clawing your hair out. And so I was like, okay, what I'm going to do with this time is I'm going to write something completely different. And so I wrote that romance novel and ended up being able to sell it in a multi-book deal, which was great. But then it has now set me on this path where I kind of consistently have two separate contracts going with separate publishers in separate genres. And so, to be completely transparent right now, I always write the book that's due next. So like, even if I'm like, oh, I'm really like feeling still murderous and dark and whatever, but it's time to turn my attention to romance, then I'll just kind of have to like beat the darkness out of myself and really change my mood to kind of gravitate toward it. But all that being said, in general, I have we all have our idea list of the books we're going to get to, one day. And because I read across so many different genres, I have so many different genre ideas for, when they finally let me write a fantasy book, or when I finally have time to like do this or that. And I think different genres are so good at telling different kinds of stories, and being like beautiful jewel pieces, set pieces for different emotional experiences, or different like little slivers of the psyche that you want to explore. And I know that eventually I want to get to all of them. And so I kind of always satisfy myself by saying like, okay, well, we're going to dig deep on like parasocial obsession and all the things you have to say and feel about that in this book, but we'll get to, whatever toxic perfectionism, or we'll get to, sister love and the blah, 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 with a future book. So just knowing that there are so many genres out there that are so good at doing different things. I mean, it's like us writers being a kid in a candy store. Why wouldn't you want like to do it all or sample it all?
Right.
I love that.
Yeah. With our last few minutes, I just would love to read a short excerpt from your book. This is from Jane's sort of inner monologue, her thoughts in this, and it struck me because I think it kind of applies not only to what Jane is doing, but also kind of to writing as well and to authors. Her thought is, quote, "I squirmed once again. The veneer of expertise was uncomfortable. I took a deep breath and told myself I wasn't an imposter. I'd been living and breathing this case for as long as anyone else. And obviously there's a certain, thematic kind of connection to this podcast, but also a big reason why we started this podcast was to talk to writers and creatives who, have their version of imposter syndrome. And I'm wondering, with where you are now in your career, with these books under your belt and having this, this decorated resume, have you started to kind of live those words, that you have been living and breathing this life and feeling maybe like you have a little bit more authority or.
Yeah, I'm so happy to answer yes to that question because I'm in an era, to borrow from Taylor Swift. I'm in my swing for the fences and let other people tell me no era.
Nice.
And very markedly different than if you had asked me this question last year or the year before, God forbid, at the start of my publishing journey. But yeah, I'm in a place where it's like I know that I'm no longer scared of getting things wrong or not living up to the dream or the idea of a book. This book Will Bury Me helped me a lot with that too, because I was at first really scared to write a book that was a monument to my father and like a book that I was going to dedicate to him, because I thought, well, how am I gonna get everything so right? How am I gonna encapsulate all of it for him in this book? And when I realized you won't, you're going to do this again and again and again through all the books that they let you write. And every time is just another sliver you're adding to the pile. And that freed me and that's now what, how I'm approaching the work in general. So I'll cut myself off there, but yeah, it's a good place to be.
And that's an amazing place to leave off, although I'm really sad this is over, that flu.
Talk to you forever.
Same. Well, it's good to hear you have a lot of other books in the pipeline, because we'll be having you on again and again. But I just want to say thank you for inspiring me to write today. And I love the idea of putting a Post-it on my laptop that says, you are the only one who will see this, or whatever.
Yeah.
Anyone else needs to write to get them to write their authentic, freeing book. I mean, that is just, it's so powerful. So thank you so much for being here today, Ashley. We love you. We love your books. And we recommend them highly to everyone. Where can people find you out in the world so they can learn more about you?
I am at ashleywinstead.com, which is my website I need to update. But most of all, I'm at on Instagram at Ashley Winstead Books. So I'm pretty active over there. And can I just say, like, as writers, Liz and Greg, that there's no better gift than having like beautiful minds read your work and be willing to talk to you about it. So thank you for these brilliant questions, and I'm such a huge fan of yours, and I adore you guys too. So you won't be getting rid of me. I'll be knocking down your doors to come back.
Bring it on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for lending us your time and for the wonderful conversation. I will take us out.
Yay.
Impostor Hour with Liz and Greg is created and hosted by us, Elizabeth Keenan and Greg Wands. The show is produced and edited by Bookwild Collective founder Kate Herget. Scott Leeds composed our original theme music, and Steve Luoma designed our logo.
And you can find us on IG at Impostor Hour Podcast. I think that's right. Oh my God, I just lost it. Or online at impostorhour.com. Thank you. Until next time.